Hi there. In this lecture we see Aron Nimzowitsch against Capablanca. So Nimzowitsch with the white pieces. This is in round 8 of the San Sebastian tournament 1911. So e4 from Nimzowitsch. We have e6, a French defense, and now d3. So this is a kind of King's Indian attack system by Nimzowitsch, except he's not fianchettoing his bishop. He plays it to e2. We have bishop d6 and white castles, queen c7, rook e1. Knight ge7. So actually Capablanca's setup here is interesting to support f5 later. This is quite an aggressive way of setting things up. We have c3 and then black castles, a3 and now f5. We have bishop f1. This seems a little bit on the passive side white setup at the moment. It seems, maybe e takes d5 tries to challenge black with d4. So for example, c4 we can play b3, and this situation with a4 leads to the possibility of quite good play for white. There are a number of weaknesses. Pawns don't go backwards. You can see this pawn's locked in. There's some compensation here to work with, especially if the dark square bishops are traded off later. e5 could become sensitive if we try and exchange off bishops later. So there is an interesting variation there. But bishop f1 was played, and we have bishop d7, and now e takes, and now b4. This is very interesting, this position. So Nimzowitsch is trying to grab these dark squares, it seems, undermining d4. Rook a e8, and now bishop b2 is played, which actually it kind of locks in this bishop potentially. If b takes c5, bishop takes c5, there is d4 followed by c4, and this is actually not bad at all for white objectively. If knight a5, then c5, bishop f4, queen c2. This situation, it seems it could be in white's favour quite significantly. White is gaining space here, has got a lock on key squares. That pawn on f5 just looks a little bit silly. That's a key consideration in all this. Is this pawn going to be a target later? Is e5 going to be a weakness later? So here, if you might ask, what about d takes c4? Then we play knight takes c4, and okay, we have an isolated queen's pawn, but we're looking at this bishop now, and this situation, if white exchanges rooks, queen b3, we don't have to take the bishop on d6, but with knight e3, white's getting a very dangerous position as an example here on this diagonal. What does black actually play? It's a tricky position. So yeah, there's some interesting variations there. So bishop b2 though, we have b6, and now d4, and this looks rather silly in a way to allow the bishop on b2 to be locked in. We really want to liberate and amplify our bishops in general. But there's a tactical basis for this. However, instead of d4, b takes c5, a4, this situation with bishop a3 should be about equal. So this is quite committal from Nimzowitsch. He's blocked in his bishop, but now he has this tactical idea. Okay, knight takes c4, d takes, bishop takes c4 check, which is dangerous. Knight g5. There's an immediate threat, not just of knight f7, but that will give that material. But knight takes h7. So that's like the bigger threat. Knight takes h7. We have bishop takes h2 in response. If a5, just to show the major threat, it's actually knight takes h7. This is a cute mechanism for mating and also stripping out, black's king safety. It's more important than trying to win the exchange. So if knight d8, let's be more sensible here and show in this position knight takes h7. There is queen takes c4. So that's a nifty defensive move, not just about f7, but about taking away the knight takes h7 threat, because there's two threats here. So that would be an interesting defensive move. Knight d8. It's actually dual purpose. What does white do? If queen h5, h6, and let's say the bishop moves, h6 to parry the mate threat. So the bishop moves, knight g8. This situation, black's getting a big advantage. It seems, white really hasn't got enough here. there is one threat through amplifying the bishop, pinning that pawn. We're threatening, well, white is threatening, our opponent is threatening queen takes h6 check. Just to put that on the board, if knight takes g5, queen takes h6, and queen g7 is made. But let's say we parry that bishop, and then it should be pretty comfortable for black. So all in all, this looks a little bit on the unsound side, but Capablanca also chooses a different approach. Bishop takes h2 check, which is also very dangerous for white. It seems the attack is against white's king more now. So black allows the exchange to be won. If knight takes h7 here, it doesn't work. The bishop's, got the h6 square to defend. So knight f7 check, rook takes, bishop takes, rook f8. And now bishop h5. If bishop b3, knight g6, c4, this is a way of kind of trying to liberate these bishops slowly. And it looks as though black, though, would be getting a vicious attack in this case. You can see that actually there's a justification for this f-pawn. It's opening up things. And the black bishops are actually pointing at the white king here. If we look at this, bishop takes, queen takes, king g1, rook f5, a rook left, and the entry points are sealed here. So there's not enough for white. White's actually on the defensive now. This is quite vicious. Yeah, this is just in black's favor. So, okay. So instead of that, bishop e3, bishop h5 was played, with the idea, it seems, of bishop f3 and trying to maybe make a mobile pawn center. We have knight g8, c4, queen d8 with the threat of queen h4 check, very dangerous. Rook f6 is also nifty. D5, there's knight e5. This position with rook h6 is dangerous for white. Yeah, this is just a big position for black. So anyway, queen d8 though, we have queen f3. Here, if d5 instead, just to show the dangers, queen h4 check, queen h2 check. And here, can you see what black plays? Which wins? For 5 points. Yeah, just check. And that disconnects the queen from the bishop. Then we take on h5. Okay, so yeah, there's some crushing lines. It doesn't matter about c6 anymore. This is just much better for black. Okay, so queen f3, we have queen h4 check and queen h3. If king g1 here, queen h2 check, and knight f6 actually strands the bishop. The bishop's actually a tactical liability. That's no good at all. Black's winning there. So, okay, queen h3. So we have queen takes f2, actually. Rook e2. Queen g3. Queen takes g3. Bishop takes g3. And then this is a really interesting situation. Nimzowitsch, in my system, that was to come out years later. He talks about blockade, and there's also a separate book called Deblockade. So there's Nimzowitsch, my system, and there's also Deblockade. And here, just positionally tactically, especially if you check my Nimzo Larsen course with bishops on b2, a large theme is amplification of such a bishop. And this was a prize opportunity to amplify the bishop with d5. Nimzowitsch was attracted to other things. This also squishes any blockades on d5. So this is a good move to try out. If knight ce7, for example here, there's potential pawn mobility. And this should be about even. You can see there's dynamic compensation. The bishop could later come back. c5, it's going to be very dangerous with these bishops and these mobile pawns. These bishops will be striking across the diagonals, and there's pawn mobility, and there's pressure on the e-file. It should be about even. For example, bishop g5, d6, knight g6, and we can see the pawn mobility. This is a terrible mistake was actually played here. Nimzowitsch, instead of playing d5, which seems to, really be the key move, maybe that for whatever concern, c5 was played. Perhaps intuitively something came in about keeping the diagonal open, not committing to d5, but it doesn't amplify this bishop. And worse, especially from a Nimzowitschian point of view, from a blockading point of view, there's potential to blockade on d5, which would de-amplify the bishop as well. And the thing is, maybe Nimzowitsch completely missed a forcing move, which is why he played c5 rather than d5, because the knight seriously threatens to, in principle, blockade now. This is a serious blockade. And it would lock in the bishop. And it seems as though maybe in this position, after bishop f3, which adds relief in it, as though d5 is going to be played, that becomes now a distant dream. So why does d5 become a distant dream to unlock the potential of the b2 bishop? There's a key move here for 200 points. It's like a tactical positional move, which is really, really unfortunate. And it does mean that this bishop never really gets the glory it should have had for the whole Pisac conception. If it wasn't about the attack, it would have been about liberating both bishops with pawn mobility. So there's a key move here, which is a fly in the ointment. Can you see what that is? So black to play. And why does it relate to blockading d5? So positional question for you as well. So key forcing moves can influence, the strategy of blockade. Okay, it's bishop b5. It's super annoying. It really is super annoying. It may have been what Nimzowitsch missed. So the rook goes off that line, trying to stop maybe bishop c4. The thing is, if rook e6, there's bishop c4. And then look at this, bishop f4, and then we've got the blockade set up. The bishop's locked in. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, positionally. This is just miserable. And then this knight reinforces the d5 blockade. For the record, let's have a look at rook d2 here in this situation instead. Can black actually set up a blockade? It looks as though d5 is being pushed through. True. But with knight f6, actually, knight e4 is going to be very interesting. So d5, knight e4 hitting the rook. Now here, if bishop takes e4, f takes e4, it seems white doesn't have enough. So for example, knight c6 is possible because we have that hook with the pawn, bishop d3. So yes, it seems as though rook d2 is insufficient. Let's look at that again. So knight e4, bishop takes. If alternatives don't fare very well, this just loses the exchange. And then black does have enough resources here, it seems, to put things under lock and key. This blockade at c6 instead. Okay, it's a less ideal blockade, but it's still winning for black. Black's material up. If we look at rook d4 instead, this looks ridiculous, but let's go with it. So white's offering an exchange here just for passed pawns. We can take that out and just hold this position. Yeah, black's just got the advantage here overall. So, okay, yeah, rook d2 is not sufficient, it seems, because of knight f6. In a nutshell, even if white does get in d5. This is under less favourable circumstances, yeah. So, okay, black's really getting, Capablanca's really got the hooks in here. So rook d2 also, it seems, falters. So let's go back to the game. Rook c2 was tried. But now knight f6, yeah, Nimzowitsch has been made to look very silly. That d5 is now in black's possession. It's pretty tragic, to say the least. It's now, positionally terrible for white after this. And we have a4, bishop d3, rook cc1, and now knight e4. So these knights on d5 and e4, this is terrible. This bishop's just very, very silly on b2. We have b5. There's not really much passed pawn potential here. We have rook f6, which also not just addresses passed pawns potentially, but it's now a vicious attack against white's king. Not only the bishop has been nullified, as a result that white hasn't really got counterplay in the center. Black's attack is raging here. This is actually a forced mate in 5 after rook f6. A forced mate in 5 now. So it's shocking. From a moment of positional disaster, it's now, it's hitting white's king, the whole thing. We have bishop takes e4. And guess what Capablanca plays, which is very, very incisive, very, very accurate. So sometimes in the art of checkmating the opponent's king, checks take a back seat to restricting escape squares, because there's a one-to-many relationship. When you squeeze out the escape squares of the opponent's king, it makes a lot of checks sometimes more effective. So what is there which takes away escape squares in this position, which makes a check more effective? What would you play here? That's a big clue. So for 100 points here, which ends the game. Okay, bishop f2. Now, I'm a fan of Nimzowitsch, but this is really, really sad. I am actually a big fan of Nimzowitsch and my system, but it was years later, and it does seem in some games between the two that, you know, Capablanca was using Nimzowicz's system against him. You know, blockade and stuff, and even attacking the king like Nimzowitsch does after. So here, it's forcing mate. This ends the game. If g3, we have bishop takes e4 check, and rook h6 is checkmate. Yes, that's pretty sad. But otherwise, you know, if the bishop moves or takes, then there's rook h6 is checkmate. It's making that check more effective, taking out escape squares. So yes, what to make of this game? It's a fascinating game, but for me, in terms of blockade, Nimzowitsch and amplification of bishops all coming together as considerations, this becomes a vivid mistake. c5, it's a vivid mistake from a number of positional considerations. Liberation of the bishops, both bishops. Yeah, intuitively, okay, it keeps the diagonal clear, but you don't want blockade on c4 or d5, especially d5, with the bishop nullified. So it's a big strategic mistake, but it must have been in relation to missing bishop b5. It must have been. Yeah, because if a different move, then, you know, d5, and then we're back to glory. You know, the bishops are liberated. There's pawn mobility. White's king safety is sorted out. Well, that h6 would have taken away a key accessibility route to White's king. But this is a whole different ball game. And in fact, White could end up being significantly better under such circumstances. For example, here winning a piece, you know, that bishop would also be exciting. You know, if the bishop moves, bishop takes. So the whole picture has changed so quickly from this forcing move. It's amazing. Bishop e5. And here it's just so dramatically positionally bust White's position in terms of the bishop, in terms of king safety as well. So there's even these rook lefts. So an amazing transformation from one mistake made by Nimzowitsch. Capablanca really incisively pounced. Okay, hope you enjoyed this. Got some points from it. Thanks so much.